thanks for joining me on my channel today. What I plan on addressing in this video is the undeniable and unnerving truth that the Australian television corporations are conspiring to overtly press a far left identitarian agenda on the Australian public. From teenage body dysmorphic transitional surgery acceptance to the subservient males bowing down to the socially conflated new reality where strong women will save the world from the catastrophic disaster wrought by highly toxic masculinity. And of course, the subsequent extinction of white cisgender normative. I'll be taking a close look at some video examples of the subservient undercurrent of neo-Marxism that permeates every action of the mass media machine, while also comparing that to some rather eye-opening literature produced on the subject. Due to the overwhelmingly vast expanse of material and individual subjects embraced under the radical left's ideological parachute, I will be producing videos in stages to best focus on one subject at a time. Today, I'll set my sights on the race-baiting, white-hating, victimhood-embracing, radically enlightened collectivists who fight against Nazis, bigots, and white supremacist culture that is, if anything, more intolerant and full of hate than any time in the history of the world. Or at least, that's the way they see it. When the simple truth is that playing the eternal victim simply gives the dangerous radicals the excuse they need to enact their hateful, intolerant disgust through any means necessary against their immortal enemies, which happens to be anyone who happens to disagree with anything they fucking say. And I fully intend to have a lot of fun doing this, and I hope you do too. Alright, so, kick back, have a drink, enjoy yourself, let's go.
Okay, first up, I've got a clip here from that program, The Verdict, which hasn't actually been on for a couple of years, but this one they've got Mark Latham on the panel giving it to him. Let's see what Carl Stefanovic and his cronies have to say about the issue of race in Australia.
It's a controversy after Senator Erica Betts, when talking about gay marriage, used the word Negro to describe an African-American Supreme Court justice.
Where's the offence in such a word? Back in the 70s and 80s, Negro was actually a respected, dignified alternative to really racist terms like nigger and darky. So I must have missed the memo somewhere in the 90s, or more recently, as to when Negro became unacceptable.
You think Negro's okay?
Well, you know, I'm happy to make my weekly donation to Australia's outrage industry by saying Negro, Negro, Negro.
Okay.
And beyond that, I've found out that at the ABC you can't use the word Aborigine. It's now got to the absurdity of policing political correctness in Australia that at the ABC they can broadcast the word sea-struck, which is as ribald as it comes out of the mouth of Michael Lawler on Four Corners, but they can't use the word Aborigine.
Well,
this is totally out of control.
I personally find you using the term Negro offensive.
Well, I missed the memo. When did you get the memo? Tell me the date when that became offensive. And who are these unelected, self-appointed people who've decided that we all need to speak like them? Who are these people?
You sound like white trash talking like that.
White trash.
Now, I think when it comes to things with political correctness, we have to, as white Australians, check our privilege.
Shut the fuck up!
With the greatest respect, there's, 7 white people around here debating on what black people would find offensive. So let's try and find out a bit more about it. But I guarantee you that they
Well, you need a bit more than the Oxford Dictionary, Carl. Okay. The real disrespect is to assume Indigenous Australians speak with one voice, that they're all the same. Because you don't know them that well, they're all the same, they all find the same expression offensive.
Isn't it?
There's a diversity. I'm assuming they're real people, a real community with inevitably a diversity of opinion, which, hello, is reality in any community.
It's that fucked up time of the year again, people. The time when all Indigenous people turn on the television or go on Facebook and promptly do this. What the fuck, Sunrise? Gotta be kidding me! That's it. Fuck Australian TV. They can all get fucked.
I should just point out at this point that this program being on at 7:30 at night actually falls under the PG rating as per the Australian Commercial Television Industry's Code of Practice, and as such the use of coarse language must be restricted to low-level coarse language which may only be used infrequently when justified by the storyline or program context. The M classification zone, however, does allow for the use of coarse language that must be appropriate to the storyline or program context, infrequent, and must not be very aggressive. It may be used more than infrequently only in certain justifiable circumstances when it is particularly important to the storyline or program context. This classification zone, however, doesn't start until 8:30 at night, a full hour after the beginning of this program. Now I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that she has blatantly disregarded the industry standard by which both her employer and herself are legally bound. The fact that she willingly violates these guidelines does not bode well for the remainder of this story. Let's see how she proceeds.
I'm talking about this shitstorm in a teacup on Channel 7's Sunrise yesterday, where a panel discussed the adoption of Aboriginal children who have been abused.
It's a hot topic this morning to discuss it. We're joined by...
Yes, Samantha Armitage was joined by two more white people, making this an all-white panel. Or as we call it in the industry, just another day in Australian commercial television.
Except for this Logie winner, and this chick, and that bloke, this girl, and this guy, this multi-Logie winner. Not seeing a lot of white people here. Oh, there's one. Oh, but she's fat. Probably lesbian too, so yeah, I guess she gets away with it. And got the ethnics in there.
Hey, where are the white women at?
That's what I want to know.
Just like the first stolen generation, where a lot of children were taken because it was for their well-being, we need to do it again, perhaps.
Perhaps you should read a book, or you could read the news.
You please shut the fuck up!
However, when it comes to Indigenous issues, Sunrise fails to include Aboriginal people, time and time again. In fact, in the past 6 months, they've done 4 different all-white panels on race or Indigenous issues. So here's my message to you, Sunrise. Next time you're thinking, gee, I wonder what Prue McSween is up to next Tuesday, stop and give me or literally any of the many, many smart black women who regularly speak out about these issues across Australia a call. Give me, black women, black.
What the fuck? What? She just referred to herself as a black woman. I mean, a smart black woman. Don't think so, love. Anyway, let's have a look at some other people who are having a bit of a problem with their not-so-blackishness.
I thought it was strange that, my full-blood brother walked in with me at the same time, could be accepted as Aboriginal, but couldn't be, and the only basis I could base that on was the fact that he has slightly more olive skin. I was sick of people questioning my Aboriginality because I had fair skin and needing to prove it constantly every day to people that I was Aboriginal because I had the fair skin.
So eventually you did get the confirmation?
Yeah, I initially, I had some issues though because I've never lived on my country. My father has never lived on country and my grandmother has never lived on country, and that I do.
Once you got the confirmation, it then took another twist because then you applied for a job.
I went for a job with Generation 1 and during that process, the lady that interviewed me said that she'd have to get back to me regarding the job because what she had been told is that she needed to hire an Aboriginal person that looked Aboriginal. I know I don't look Aboriginal. I look at myself, I see my mother completely. She's of Scottish heritage. I don't deny that at all. So I understand when people see me face value that I don't look what they expect to see of an Aboriginal person. And I think that in itself is an issue.
What is your background? What is your Aboriginal ancestry?
I have one Aboriginal grandparent.
If I were to ask you to describe yourself, what would you say?
I'm an Aboriginal Australian.
You're a loony.
I think she's telling lies.
Yeah, my full-blood brother, same mother and father, one Aboriginal grandparent. My mother, she's of Scottish heritage. That in itself is an issue.
So her brother's a full-blooded Scottish Indigenous Australian with one Aboriginal grandparent and a white sister.
You are so full of shit.
Next.
Well, another story is Brianna, who was trying to get into the Queensland Police. You've been sitting exams recently, I believe. Yep. But in order to do that, you wanted to get your Aboriginality confirmed. Tell us what happened in your case.
Well, what I've done is I've applied through Queensland Police Force and I've gone through the same entry as everybody else, and I've just sat that exam waiting to hear back. But I do want to have that back up, as if I don't pass the exam, what everyone else has to do is they can't resit the exam for another 12 months, whereas I get the backup of being able to apply for the JEP program.
What is the JEP program?
For Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. So they do an extra 6 months at the academy, brings them up to speed with everyone else, basically.
Could she have just got through on her own merits?
Well, that's what she's doing, but that's just there for a backup, and so we just decided we'll go down and get our apply for that confirmation.
I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will be judged by the color of their skin, not by the content of their character. I have a dream today.
Damn straight.
And just one more example of racial inequality from our not-so-friendly...
Dirty fucking son with a big fucking mouth!
I chose Sydney Uni partly because I just loved Sydney Uni, thought it was beautiful. I thought it looked like there was lots of great campus culture.
Bullshit.
Well, I actually got into my course through doing the Gadigal program, which is kind of like a support program. It's kind of like a flexible entry thing as well when you need to get into a course and you don't have the exact marks.
Oh, snap!
Well, I think this calls for a change of venue. There we go. Sit down, get comfortable. It looks like we're going to be here for a while. And there it is. So far, this woman seems to have blatantly violated the commercial television industry's code of practice, openly insulted her industry colleagues, slandered any and all rival networks and their staff, sensationalised and grandstanded the moral importance and righteousness of her own opinion, which I find middling at best, and downright untrue, if I'm being honest. So it comes as no surprise, as her whole persona is built on a foundation of inequity due to racial and cultural privileges afforded to her according to her birthright. And aside from not being able to maintain eye contact while explaining how she subverted the selection process to acquire a position that would have otherwise been offered to a student more competent, whose dreams of becoming an international investigative journalist, speaking the hard truth and exposing corruption in the highest echelons of power, bravely facing a cold, harsh, indifferent world with the steely determination of a ravenous bulldog, will forever be unfulfilled. Just because some flighty chick wants to go on telly and whinge about some shit that doesn't even affect her directly. And why wouldn't she? Why go to too much trouble to get in, when you can just get in the normal way? The normal way any Aboriginal gets in.
It's the same old usual boring normal way you get in. Failed me exams and applied. They snapped me up.
That's right. Why bother giving the position to someone who's actually got the grades, who's actually got the brains, who's actually got the determination and the skill and the willingness to learn? I don't want to give it to them. We want to make it equal for everybody, don't we? How are you going to make it equal for everybody? A well-meaning notion that once put in place simply rewards the incompetent. Let's have a look at the issue of Aboriginal deaths in custody. Wikipedia has this to say regarding the definition. Aboriginal deaths in custody became an issue of community concern in Australia because of a widespread perception that a disproportionate number of Indigenous Australians had died in jail after being arrested by police or otherwise convicted of offences. This concern was particularly acute in the 1980s, when there was a perception amongst some sections of the community that these deaths were being caused either directly or indirectly by the police and prison authorities. Now, in 1987, the Royal Commission into Aboriginal Deaths in Custody was established, and the Royal Commission concluded that the deaths were not caused by deliberate killing by police and prison officers. And it goes on with some anecdotal evidence, and just tripe really, it's pointless. You can read it if you like. It concludes with a 2013 review of deaths in custody by Australian Institute of Criminology found that the number of Aboriginal deaths in custody had increased over the previous 5 years. Now, you will see that that is due to an increase in Aboriginal population numbers and percentages overall. So obviously the more there are, the more will die. But the report found the most of these deaths were due to natural causes like cancer and heart conditions, replacing self-harm as the leading cause of death in custody, which I can't believe ever was, considering the amount of people who just die in jail. AIC Director Dr. Adam Tomlinson also noted that, especially for the last 8 years, Indigenous people in custody have been less likely to die in custody than non-Indigenous people. Especially for the last 8 years, but generally, overall, non-Indigenous peoples have always been more likely to die in custody. And we'll get to some statistics about that right after we take a look at how the media represents the issue. Now, I'd just like to stop it there and say congratulations to the police. Almost 20 years, not one single death. That's extraordinary. I think they've gone over and above their duty. And that would be a story in and of itself. But I can tell by Wally Ali's self-righteous and overly indignant blustering that his intention is quite the opposite.
A family is without their mother, without their daughter, without their sister, aunt and cousin, and we're disappointed that we've lost a member of our community here in New South Wales.
Rebecca became the first Indigenous person to die in a police cell in New South Wales in 16 years. And the reason there hasn't been a death since 2000 can almost certainly be put down to a single piece of policy. It's called a Custody Notification Service, and it was introduced in New South Wales in 2000. The CNS is a notification that alerts the Aboriginal Legal Service that an Aboriginal person has been placed into police custody.
It's not just about legal advice, it's about asking people if they're okay, if their family know where they are, and also if they need any medications.
Now, you might be asking yourself, isn't that something police should already be doing?
These factors could have easily changed the outcome. I know that the CNS has saved lives.
But it didn't save Rebecca's life, and that's because when Rebecca was locked up, she wasn't arrested, but detained for her own safety, meaning the police responsible technically didn't have to use the Custody Notification Service, and the Aboriginal Legal Service never knew Rebecca was in a police cell. Had she actually committed a crime, she'd have more chance of being alive today. And it was at least 6 hours after she was found dead before Rebecca's family were told of her passing. Just think about that. Imagine police found your mum dead first thing in the morning and you weren't told till after lunch. New South Wales Police refused to speak to the project about the case because it's now under investigation.
As if this holier-than-thou tirade wasn't embarrassing enough, he doubles down on the issue by making scathing remarks and false statistical statements in an article by Rowan Smith. I'll come back to that because I just want to have a look at some actual statistics first. Firstly, let's be clear about what we are talking about. What we're talking about here is people who have died in a police holding cell. Not persons who have been convicted of a crime and are spending time in a prison, not persons who are on remand, not people who are evading police, running from the police, driving from the police, shooting at the police, not people who have been arrested, who are being transported to the police station. These are only deaths that have occurred in the police station holding cell. That is, that they are under the direct duty of care of the police officers who have arrested them and who are now charging them and working up their paperwork. This seems to be the issue. So let's just do a little statistical analysis on that. So you can see from these government statistics charts that for the 2-year period of 2011 to 12 and 12 to 13, that the total number of Indigenous deaths in custody was 6 plus 9 equaling 15, as where the total number of non-Indigenous deaths in custody was 36 plus 44 equaling 80. So if we do a little math on that, 80 divided by 15 equals 5.33. So you can essentially round that down to 1 in 5 people who die in prison is Aboriginal. Now you might think that considering they only make up 2% of the Australian population, that they are heavily overly represented. Nearly 1/5 of all deaths in custody are Aboriginal. But you have to take into consideration that the percentage of Aboriginals in prison is up over 28%. So you can see from this statistic from 5 years ago that 27% of the prison population were of Indigenous background. Now, of the 6 of the 42 deaths in 2011 and 12 were of Indigenous persons, according to 14% of all prison deaths, and 9 of the 53 deaths in the following year were Indigenous, according to 17% of all prison deaths. So 17 plus 14 divided by 2 equals 15.5. Taking these numbers into account, let's have a look at the first part of this misleading article. Firstly, it opens with, Waleed Ali says Australia is not ready to accept that Black Lives Matter. It is the reason we turn a blind eye to unspeakable acts. I'm not sure, that's just grandstanding. It's just fear-mongering, it's just attacking the boogeyman, it's a strawman argument. It doesn't mean anything. What unspeakable acts are we talking about? He goes on. Black Lives Matter overseas, but Australia's not at the point where we fully accept that. I don't think so. If you're talking about the African American movement in America, in the USA, not everybody's on board with that. I guarantee there's a lot of pushback. So no, Black lives do not matter overseas as much as you might think they do.
How are we going to get rid of racism and stop talking about it?
Oh shit, Sherlock. And he goes on about the death penalty in Australia, but the truth is we still have the death penalty. Clearly, death is still a penalty we're okay with in this country. As long as, 1, the person dying is Indigenous, and 2, their carers don't illegally murder them outright. What world is this guy living in? Despite the community issues of violence and substance abuse and poor health, the fact that Indigenous people are likely to die 10 years younger than the national average, and seeing that they make up almost 30% of the prison population, yet only account for 15% of all prison deaths, it just shows that they are hugely underrepresented. And where there's an underrepresentation on one side of the scale, there's bound to be an overrepresentation on the other, which we'll see now as we get back to the police custody holding cell issue. So according to information provided by Crime Statistics Australia, 149 deaths occurred in custody total between the years 2013 and 2015. Of those, only 34 occurred in police custody, which if you work out as a percentage, you find that a little less than 1/4 of all custody deaths occur in police custody. Of those deaths, 85% occurred whilst attempting to detain an individual, leaving only 15% deaths occurring in an institutional setting such as a police cell, which brings the percentage of all deaths in custody which occurred within a police cell down to a little under 3.5%. So according to this table, over a 2-year period, 2 plus 4, 6 Indigenous, 29 plus 14, 43 non-Indigenous deaths in police custody, which equates to about 14% of police custody deaths. So if we then take that percentage of the total deaths in police custody, Aboriginals only account for around 0.5% of all deaths in police custody. Now a figure of 0.5% doesn't seem particularly worrying to me. It certainly isn't a problem of epidemic proportions as many claim. What is of worrying concern to me is these figures that I've highlighted in this table, which show, as I previously stated, that the underrepresentation of Aboriginal deaths causes a swing of overrepresentation to the remainder of the prison population. And these figures are wildly disproportionate, which is perhaps due to a system which is already stretched, choosing to divert vital resources from the care of all prisoners to a select minority, causing the general level of appropriate care for the majority of prisoners to be substandard. In New South Wales alone, the number of non-Indigenous deaths is around double that of the next highest state. It seems that in order to save a couple of Indigenous lives, they are prepared to sacrifice dozens of non-Indigenous lives. So yes, Black Lives Matter, but everyone else can fuck off and die. Literally. Or it could be the Australian government simply fuck everything up. As we see here, if you are sent to a government prison, you are statistically 4 times more likely to die than in a private prison. So why is it that one death in 20 years causes the media to attack with such venomous disdain, when during the same period over 150 non-Indigenous deaths occurred? such as in this article, statements are made such as, every person in the Aboriginal community needs to know and trust their loved ones are safe when taken into police custody. Now that's a fair statement if it read, every person in the Australian community, and also states that there is no good reason why my community has to experience the extreme trauma of another Aboriginal death in custody. Now if one death causes extreme trauma, what level of trauma is caused by 150 deaths? It's race baiting and victimhood virtue signalling. Any excuse to portray themselves as the oppressed and justify their racist hatred of all white Australians. Like in this article, which argues that the problem is worse now than 25 years ago, despite all the resources expended on the issue. Despite deaths in custody having been dramatically reduced, it's worse, they say, because today the percentage of Aboriginals in prison is double that of 25 years ago. The reasons cited for this trend is racist police, racist judges, racist courts, racist society, an institutionalised and systemic racist culture that is going to great lengths to oppress the Aboriginal people. A far more reasonable cause could be that crime within the Aboriginal community has risen dramatically. But for that to be true, then Aboriginal community leaders and supporters would have to take personal responsibility for the situations they face. But that doesn't gel with the victimhood narrative. Much easier to invent an enemy than blame anyone and everyone but themselves. Now this next story, from a website called Welcome to Country, is entirely typical of the left's reactionary practice of attack and accuse without a shred of evidence. And it's really in the comments that you can see how volatile and dangerous this behaviour of acting without thinking can be. Its obvious intent was to cause anger and panic in the minds of the indoctrinated plebs who can't think for themselves, and succeeds in doing just that. Explosive allegations surround latest Aboriginal death in custody. There are explosive allegations surrounding yet another Aboriginal death in custody. The New South Wales family is in shock tonight after a young Aboriginal man became the latest Aboriginal death in custody. The man is believed to have died early today in Tamworth Hospital, where he was in the intensive care unit. A close friend of the young man has alleged that corrective officers in Tamworth Jail bashed and then proceeded to hang the young Indigenous man in order to cover it up as a suicide. The friend said the young man had suffered a significant amount of injury that showed he was in a struggle. The friend went on to say that he also had blood and skin under his fingernails as well. The friend also alleged that there is 1 hour of video surveillance unaccounted for in the jail. Update. For anyone in the Tamworth Armidale area, there is planned for a protest at the Tamworth Correctional Centre today, Saturday at 1 PM. Why does that not surprise me? Now whether you believe this fanciful story or not is irrelevant. It's what comes next that is most distressing. The comments start off respectfully enough. It's not until somebody challenges the narrative that the vitriol and hatred starts to fly. This should be a challenge for Change.org to take up the fight of justice and hold those accountable for such disgusting acts. Every life created has 100% rights to live, regardless of race or skin colour. This Saturday, September 30, so we'll be there. No place for it in this country. All screws are corrupt. Wouldn't put it past them to do this. And then Rosie Sharp. This is where it gets interesting. LOL, newsflash. No suspicious circumstances. End of story. Reply. There's clearly something wrong with you, or you're just an outright inconsiderate cunt. Who the fuck are you to sit there and say this and that, cunt? What if it was one of your loved ones, you utter prick? I've been seeing and reading your nasty outright comments. If you got nothing nice to say, cunt, don't say fuck all at all, you fucking pig. That's all yous white folks like. You sit back and to quick and judge say nasty things. What the fuck would you know about what happened in there? Cunt, do you fucking work with the cunts, you fucking jockstraps? You probably don't even know the truth yourself, cunt. And I'm gonna say to you, you fucking racist fuck, it was fucking murder, 'cause copper-loving cunts like you need to get your facts straight, because I'll feel sorry for when the coppers' dogs get justice, they want to be saving their bumhole because it will become someone bitch inside. So fuck off with your fucking disgusting comments, you rude cunt. Hope one day your family bury you, you disgusting piece of shit. Black is a beautiful colour, cunt. Don't forget that. Give the cunts justice. Racist fucking pigs think you all good in a uniform. Use cunts and nobody when you don't have one. Hope justice gets served. Peace, hater. And it goes on. Shame on you, Rosie Sharp. How dare you post that comment when you don't know anything about the circumstances surrounding the boy's death, particularly in this forum. It's because of ignorant and insensitive people like yourself that tragedies such as this are allowed to happen. All deaths in custody are suspicious. How ignorant are you? Shame on you, Rosie Sharp. How the fuck can you make a statement? How the fuck can you make a statement like this when you know sweet FA about the young Indigenous father? Your comments are unwarranted, as every death in custody are suspicious. Rosie, yeah, right, not. And Aaron Dawes, totally agree. Far too many black deaths and whites, common sense. Newsflash, Rosie Sharp was drowning, so I threw a glass of water to the beach. There were no suspicious circumstances to her drowning. Wake up to yourself. Was that a veiled death threat? What an ill-informed child you are. My heart just broke for your family and your little boy. Rosie Sharp, you sound like a right royal cunt. Not the first Aboriginal to get murdered in this town, and probably won't be the last. Just shut your fucking hole. Rosie Sharp, who are you to say they will continue to die because of their own paths of destruction? You know what, you're the uneducated. You know what, you're the uneducated moron, and I hope something hits your family. You're a disgusting pig, and I'm sick and tired of parasites like you. Whatever he may have done doesn't give any cunt the right to bash him or hang him. I suppose you're perfect. First, let me throw up over you, pig. Sad indeed, but to call him intelligent. Google him and his history. Since when did intelligence bear any relevance to a person's right to live or die? Since when, huh? Rosie Sharp, and that means that he should die? Shut the fuck up, you're both just another dumb Aussie fucks that refuse to look through the smoke. Unless fucks keep your 1 cent opinions yourself, you disgusting pig. This is very sad. Blah blah. Hope you all apologise to the officers when the allegations are proven to be false. It is sad that he has died, but blame should not be falsely laid. Coroner will conduct an inquiry, then, if necessary, follow up. You're a fucking dog, like the fucking police. Like the fucked police and the fucked up legal system. Fuck you. Whatever the fuck, he's a young and intelligent man. Why the fuck would he hang himself? You degenerate, useless fuck. If he was white, a fucking different story. So why don't you shut the fuck up and kick back? Cunt, you don't know shit what happened to my cousin, so shut your fuck up mouth. You disgusting punk, whatever. You fucking have no idea what you're talking about. Should keep your hole shut. Definitely wasn't one of the inmates. Those who did it, blah blah, targeting Aboriginal people. I was on the inside of those bars, I know those screws and the behaviour towards Aboriginal people. This needs to go viral throughout all correctional centres with Aboriginal young people. They have so much to live for, but police think that they have the upper hand. Fuck racism and the police. Dogs, dogs, dogs. Justice needs to prevail for our culture. Meredith Green, if he was an intelligent man, why did he go to jail? Why was he in jail? What's your fucking point, Mark Porter? Aboriginal young people goes to jail for pitying little things. Fuck you, Mark Porter. They don't go to jail to get killed by fucking dumb motherfucking police, you faggot. You cunts probably in on it all. Low life, no good faggots. I stand with the Aboriginal brothers and sisters, and I'm a white fellow. This young fellow should not have died, and someone better come up with some answers. Aboriginal people are dying in custody far too often. We must stop. But so true, Brendan. It's getting bad these days. It's terrifying knowing that coppers can get away with shit. Read the message, cuz there's a lot of messages missing, ha ha ha, from Mark Porter. Mark Porter will, he was in jail, as a lot of young folks are. The wrong paths are taken, the wrong crowds, illicit substances. It all happens, but it is irrelevant to the fact that this young man is now deceased. Blame is not being falsely laid, Trevor. Wait. You clearly have no clue what you're talking about. No matter what the findings are, Tamworth Correctional Centre is at fault, because they, like every single facility across the country, it failed to implement the findings of the Royal Commission into the Aboriginal deaths in custody. Blah blah blah, millions of dollars spent. Deaths in custody are accelerating again because Australians won't keep its promise. Not even the promise. Paid millions of their own dollars. So you can piss off with your defence of the New South Wales injustice system, because like the rest of this country, it doesn't deserve it. Read them now, gonna miss you mate, blah blah blah, and that's all. Well, there's more, but I'm not gonna spend all day on that. So here we are, not 24 hours later, and the Oxley police say that Tane Chatfield's death at Correctional Centre was not suspicious. Police say the death of an Aboriginal juvenile in custody at Tamworth Correctional Centre is not being treated as suspicious. And just for the record, Mr. Chatfield was being held in custody on robbery charges for an alleged incident involving a firearm in Armidale in September 2015. Mr. Chatfield was also due to face trial in Tamworth on 3 robbery-related charges in late October. Oxley Police confirmed local detectives attended the prison after the incident. This is standard protocol for any death. Detectives attend to the scene and conduct inquiries, Detective Acting Inspector Jason Darcy said. The death is not being treated as suspicious, and report will be prepared for the coroner. Announcement stating that no wrongdoing was evident, and the assurance of the customary coronial inquiry will satiate the bloodlust of the SJW harpies? No. This seems to be par for the course with Marxist ideologues. They're so damn sure of their moral and ethical superiority, they can never admit they're wrong. so they belligerently stay the course regardless of the harm their false assumptions will inevitably lead to. I guess that's why communist regimes never fizzle out. Rather, they implode catastrophically, usually resulting in the deaths of millions of innocent people. And as you can see from this page, they continued with the protest, they've continued with the online campaign, they've continued to call for justice where no injustice has occurred, they've demanded a fundamental rethink of the criminal justice system in New South Wales, the whole system of course, and also demanding that the Aboriginal organisations and criminal justice system come up with solutions for community-centred alternatives to prison. Not only do they believe that a crime has occurred against them, they demand that they be allowed to commit those crimes and not go to prison. Moving on to another story of Aboriginal criminality, where the true villain is anybody but the perpetrator himself. This is the story of one William Bugmy, which according to this ABC News article, highlights everything that is wrong with justice for Aboriginal people. The opening line says it all, claiming that this issue highlights everything that's wrong with the way Aboriginal people are treated under the law, implying that they're not being treated correctly, implying that the courts need to treat them differently, implying that they need special privileges availed to them just so they can function in society. Bugmy was an inmate in the Broken Hill Correctional Centre on an 8-month stretch for assaulting police. In early 2011, he threw a pool ball at a prison guard, striking him in the eye socket and ultimately leaving him blind in one eye. In sentencing, the judge took account of the fact that Bugmy came from a profoundly disadvantaged background. He was fostered at the age of 12 and jailed by the age of 13, where he spent most of his adult life. Despite this, the New South Wales government appealed against the leniency of the sentence. The New South Wales Criminal Court of Appeals agreed, and Bugmy's non-parole period was increased by a year. Now that sounds like pretty standard procedure for a violent assault that resulted in permanent injury and or disability. Now it seems that the author of this article is being somewhat conservative with the facts. After opening with an unsubstantiated claim that there is no justice for Aboriginals, he glosses over the actual offence, leaving out all vital details, so I obtained a more telling account, which reads as thus. On the 8th of January 2011, Mr. Bugmy became upset when it became apparent that his visitors would not arrive at the centre before the end of visiting hours. Consequently, Senior Correctional Officer Gould agreed to see whether visiting hours could be extended in this instance. Apparently unsatisfied with this outcome, Mr. Bugmy followed Mr. Gould into the wing office, saying, "I'll split you open, you cunt." Mr. Bugmy then left the wing office and telephoned his partner, repeating to her that he would split Gould open. When Assistant Superintendent Pitt and another officer, Mr. Donnelly, arrived to speak to Mr. Bugmy in the exercise yard, he also threatened them, before he ran to the pool table, picking up pool balls and began throwing them at Mr. Pitt and Mr. Donnelly. Upon Mr. Gould's entering the yard, Mr. Bugmy repeated his earlier threat, striking Mr. Gould with the pool balls. As Mr. Gould attempted to secure himself inside the wing office, Mr. Bugmy threw another ball which struck Mr. Gould in the left eye, causing him to immediately lose sight in that eye. Mr. Bugmy climbed onto the gymnasium roof and continued throwing pool balls at the officers. When he eventually came down from the roof, he expressed satisfaction at Mr. Gould's injuries and stated that he had not finished with Gould. The article goes on to explain how this would be an otherwise uncontroversial ruling, except for that Criminal Courts of Appeals Judge Justice Hoban remarked in his decision that, with the passage of time, the extent to which social deprivation in a person's youth and background can be taken into account must diminish. I'll be coming back to that statement, as the entire legal appeal hangs on those few words. But instead of explaining the definition, or putting that sentence into context, he launches into an attack, a personal attack, on Justice Hoban himself, stating that how, growing up in Sydney and attending Riverview College, which is actually St. Ignatius, they can't even fucking get that right, one of the nation's most prestigious schools, followed by Sydney University, one of the world's most prestigious universities? Are you sure? What the fuck?
I just loved Sydney Uni, thought it was beautiful.
You've got to be fucking kidding me.
Yeah, it's right up there. Harvard, Cambridge, MIT, Sydney. A school so prestigious, they'll let anyone in, even if you...
You don't have the exact mark.
So the article's author, one Sol Bellend, seems to think that if someone attends a prestigious school, receives stocks of the school, then attends a quality university from which he graduates with a Bachelor's of Arts degree with first-class honours, then completed a Bachelor's of Law degree with honours, then completed a Master's of Law degree with honours, holds the military rank of Major General, has been awarded the Order of Australia, and has served on the Australian Supreme Court for well over a decade, then they must be a complete idiot, and are certainly not well qualified to sit in judgment on the effects of grinding poverty and disadvantage. So who does he think would be qualified? Maybe this guy? Maybe one of these guys? I'd say they know a little bit about poverty and disadvantage, but I for one wouldn't trust them to preside over the proceedings of the criminal courts. He goes on to describe Justice Hoban's statements as outrageous comments that left the door open for a High Court challenge by the Aboriginal Legal Service, and that belief that somehow someone's disadvantage diminishes over time is what the High Court struck down, which is absolutely not true. However, the High Court did not agree with the Aboriginal Legal Service that Aboriginality and all the entrenched disadvantage that goes with it should also be a consideration in sentencing. Now he quotes a statement from Justice Hoban, which does go some way to explaining what the purpose of his original statement that they took such offence with. Quote, "Mr. Bugmy, we've sentenced you to jail numerous times. Indeed, you've spent most of your life behind bars, and yet you continue to offend. I'm at a loss to understand why extended jail time has not set you straight. You clearly have not learned your lesson, nor, despite our repeated intervention, found a way to overcome your tragic background." To which Bellend's response is, "The logic is perverse and offensive. His disadvantage has not shifted, and no amount of prison time is going to alter that reality. In fact, he's more disadvantaged because of racism and mainstream indifference to our suffering, etc., blah 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 ad nauseum." Which seems to be the left's go-to response for any issue they take exception with. Now it baffles me why any Aboriginal person would choose to identify with a group that's constantly being fed the false narrative that they are to inevitably suffer entrenched disadvantage and grinding poverty, and why someone like this would choose to identify with a group that is most likely to die young, far more likely to be incarcerated, suffer health issues, drug and alcohol addiction, domestic violence, and a myriad of other disadvantageous social traits. Personally, promoting this mindset amongst any group of people is what I find perverse and offensive. He continues, "We don't need a judge on a high salary with a world-class education to tell us that the reality of our disadvantage should diminish over time." Well, it seems somebody should, because you're not fucking listening. We are the most jailed people on earth, with a rate apparently 8 times greater than the jailing rate of black men in apartheid South Africa. Holy shit, that's getting low. I should point out that crime rates under apartheid have been much lower than anything the ANC has ever been able to deliver. But any statement that screams racist scum would suffice. I'm sure if they could get away with saying Jews during the Holocaust, he probably would. The rate is 5 times greater than the Australian average. Wait a minute. So the Australian average is 5 times greater than the Australian average, yet 8 times greater than apartheid South Africa. So Australia is incarcerating its general population at almost double the rate apartheid Africa was incarcerating black males? Viva Afrikaan! This leads to the logical conclusion that either Aboriginal people are the biggest criminals on earth, Oh, there's something seriously wrong with our criminal justice system. And seeing that no other ethnic group in Australia seems to have such a problem with it, I think there's something seriously wrong with this guy's mental state. Anyway, Australians seem to think Aboriginal people should be able to forget the past, dust themselves off, accept defeat, and get on with it. This is an absurd argument. I don't find myself being distressed by my ancestors being displaced from their native homelands. I never find myself pining for the Scottish Highlands, or the lush German forests, or even the Danish fjords.
Got me pining for the fjords. Pining for the fjords? What kind of talk is that?
So in a final insult to the Australian people, he states, "The High Court ruling I'll embrace is the one which finds that no Australian court has the right to sit in judgment of my people." And that's fundamentally what this should be all about. Sovereignty. Right of Aboriginal people to control Aboriginal lives. Now the only problem with this is they will have to accept responsibility for their own problems, and stop blaming white settlement for all that is wrong with the world. It has become obvious to me that a major problem with these Marxist identitarian thinkers is that they always seem to believe that they know better than anyone due to their circumstances, regardless of training, experience, knowledge, research, or application of any analytical process. That is, what would you know? You're not black. As if racial identity equals qualification. If you can't rationally argue the point, simply attack the individual in order to reduce their independent viewpoints to the falsely assumed groupthink of their perceived enemy, whom they vehemently despise for no other reason than the colour of their skin. In this case, white people. I came across a far more balanced article from the Herald Sun Online by Andrew Bolt, who himself has been criticised and even had legal proceedings actioned against him for supposed far-right views, just for presenting sensible arguments that conflict with the acceptable narrative. He writes, "Another grim step towards treating people not as individuals, but representatives of a race. Not masters of their own destiny, but victims of a collective history." And so far as Bugmy goes, he states, "The then 29-year-old had assaulted a prison guard by pelting him with pool balls. The guard was hit in the left eye, suffering retinal detachment, eye socket fractures, and permanent loss of vision. Bugmy solicitors, the Aboriginal Legal Services, New South Wales and ACT, are asking the High Court to follow the Canadian Supreme Court judgment of R versus Ipperley, which ruled that real equality under the law cannot be achieved unless courts accept that historical, social and economic deprivation can affect moral culpability." A little odd this wasn't mentioned in the original article. So we're down to racial quotas, and hence different standards of justice for different races. Equality of sentencing between the races becomes inequality of sentencing between individuals, with an offender for one overrepresented race becoming less likely to be jailed. He goes on to say, "Aboriginal people can never be liberated from violence. The nation needs to understand that to liberate Aboriginal people from violence, deep cultural change is necessary, away from traditional norms and practices of violence. Of course, this would infringe on their cultural rights." And when faced with the question of why so many Australians are unable or unwilling to voice their concerns about violence within the Aboriginal community, he has this to say: "A key reason is the guilt white Australians carry for the injustice and loss the Aboriginal people suffered under white colonisation. For many caring, well-educated white Australians, the primary task is to address these past colonial wrongs. For them, cultural respect, cultural rights, cultural relativism, even for violence, never criticised, and a sense of otherness, more than our shared humanity, are uppermost." Now there are many traditional practices, even today, such as the taking of child brides and even cannibalism, that are simply unacceptable in a civilised society. To assume all cultural traditions are worthy of respect and should be embraced is extremely dangerous and wrong. Each individual is responsible for their own actions and are subject to the consequences of those actions. Which leads me to the court's final decision on the case. What we have here is merely a summary of some of the key points that arose from that decision. The High Court rejected the submission that courts should take judicial notice of the background of systemic deprivation of Aboriginal offenders as a category. Their Honours held that the analysis of the sentencing judge must apply to an offender's subjective case will be the same whatever the race of the offender, in order to achieve individual justice. The High Court held that to consider the circumstances of Indigenous offenders differently to those of non-Indigenous offenders would cease to involve individualised justice. In the High Court, the Director acknowledged that the effects of significant deprivation do not diminish with the passage of time, and repeat offending, and should subsequently be taken into account to determine the appropriate sentencing in every case. The majority of the High Court accepted this submission, explaining that a background of that kind may compromise the person's capacity to mature and learn from experience. However, an offender's background may not always give rise to sentencing mitigation. The example that the majority gave is that if an offender has grown up in a violent environment, which explains their recourse to violence when frustrated, given full weight to the effects of that upbringing, may reduce the offender's moral capability, but also may increase the need to protect the community from that offender. In conclusion, properly understood, Bugme does not address the role of Aboriginality per se in sentencing decisions. However, the effects of the decision is that Aboriginal offenders will be able to rely upon the evidence of systemic social deprivation as a relative factor in the determination of an appropriate sentence in an individual basis. And even though it does say the decision is that Aboriginal offenders, it basically covers the understanding that all offenders will be able to rely on the evidence given to the court regarding social deprivation. So, in my summary, I would say this was a fucking waste of time. They proved nothing. They taught nobody any lessons. Nobody learned a damn thing. But at least the courts did agree that some people who've had some pretty fucked up lives should be considered. Maybe we should give this guy a little bit of leniency here. But at the same time, the guy's pretty messed up, so let's try and keep him in prison for as long as possible so he doesn't fuck other people up. This is not a win for Aboriginal people. This is not a win for the justice system. This is not oppression. This is not systemic racism. This is common sense. Some people, due to their upbringing, will behave in a very inappropriate manner, and that has to be taken into consideration. So I'll leave you with an example of the type of hatred and racial violence that I'm talking about.
You see these cunts? You see what they do? White dogs! White dogs! White dogs! White dogs! It's not white! It's not white shit! Oh, fuck!
Alright, I'm out of time. To be continued. Remember, I am Max Beaumont, and you are not. Next time.